All right, we are going to be going through the levels of organization. So how are human bodies organized? That's what we're going to talk about today. So here are our standards and objectives, which you can peruse on your own. Okay, we're going to talk about body organization. So we're going to start at the smallest and get progressively larger. So we're going to begin with chemical and molecular. So atoms combine to form molecules like water, like carbon dioxide, like glucose, and shape of molecules helps determine their function. The cellular level, next largest. But cells are the smallest living unit in the body, so the smallest unit of life, and cells are made of organelles that have specific functions. In anatomy, we're not going to focus so much on the specific organelles, but we may in certain units. And then we have the tissue level. Remember, groups of cells make tissues, and there are four main types of tissues: epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. And then we have the organ level, so groups of tissues make organs, and organs include things like the brain, the heart, the lungs, the liver. And then we have the organ system level, so groups of organs are going to make an organ system, and that includes things like the nervous system, digestive system, cardiovascular system. And then we get to the organism level, and the organism is a single living thing. In this case, in anatomy, we're talking about a human being. Okay, so here's your first question. What makes up a tissue? Do you remember? It's a group of cells. Okay, so here's a flow chart just representing what I just talked about. So chemicals, the chemical level, then you have the cellular level, then you have tissues, organs, organ system, and then you would go to organism. So the organization at each level determines the structural characteristics and functions of higher levels. So if the molecules aren't arranged correctly, we can't get cells arranged correctly. If the cells aren't organized and functioning correctly, then we don't have tissues that are organized and functioning correctly. Okay, so if the atoms and molecules at the chemical level don't align properly, protein filaments will not form. Without protein filaments, cardiac muscles will not be able to contract powerfully. And without proper contractions of the cardiac muscle, blood will not be pumped effectively. And then if we don't get blood pumped effectively, all of our cells and tissues do not get oxygen and then remove carbon dioxide. So the chemical level, one thing we're going to discuss in a little greater detail is enzymes or catalysts, and they're proteins that speed up reactions by lowering the activation energy. Okay, inorganic compounds, that's anything like that does not contain carbon and hydrogen. So water, carbon dioxide, oxygen, acids, bases, salts, these are typically smaller molecules. Whereas organic compounds that contain carbon and hydrogen paired together, they're typically larger molecules and include things in the four main categories of biomolecules: carbohydrates, proteins, nucleic acids, and lipids and fats. All right, what else? Water. Oh my goodness, water is the single most important chemical in the human body. It's about 2/3 of your body weight. We need it for chemical reactions. It has a high heat capacity, which means it takes a lot of energy to change its temperature, and that helps us stabilize our body temperature. It also helps to cool us because when sweat evaporates, it pulls away a lot of our body heat with it. And it's an excellent solvent, thank goodness. It dissolves a lot of gases and chemicals in our body. And then pH. So normal blood pH is a pretty narrow range from 7.35 to 7.45. And if your blood is too acidic, you have a condition called acidosis. That means your pH of your blood is below 7.35. If you have alkalosis, the pH of your blood is above 7.45. And within a very narrow range, you're going to start to experience symptoms and get too far from that range, and it can result in death. The most important nutrient is, do you remember? Water, of course. In acidosis, the pH of blood is, so in acidosis, lower than 7.35. Okay, diffusion. Diffusion is the movement of particles from high concentration to low concentration, and it allows for exchange of gases, wastes, and nutrients. It's what happens in the alveoli in our lungs. It's what happens in the villi in our small intestine. It's what happens to allow nutrients into and waste out of every single cell. Super important. Well, there's a specific type of diffusion called osmosis, and osmosis is the movement of water from high to low concentration, and it's going to go across a membrane. All right, when cells are in an isotonic solution, they basically stay the same size. That means water's moving in and water's moving out, but it's going at the same rate, so the cell stays about the same size. If we put a cell into a hypertonic solution, that means there's too much stuff, there's too much solute. The cells are going to lose water, they're going to shrink. And that's also called crenation, when they start shrinking like that. And then if we put cells in hypotonic, which means it's more like distilled water, there's less stuff outside, the cells are going to take in more water. So there's too much water coming in. The cells are going to burst potentially, and that's called lyse. All right, then we have a process called exocytosis, and a vesicle is going to release contents from the cell. So it's this little vesicle going to move to the cell membrane. It's going to fuse and release the contents. Things like hormones, mucus, wastes, neurotransmitters, they can get released this way. The opposite process would be endocytosis, and that's where you're going to bring materials from outside of the cell inside. And so here the cell membrane is going to pinch off and create a vesicle, and then that's going to come inside. It happens in white blood cells to engulf bacteria or cell debris or other abnormal materials, which you can see happening in that GIF. And then we have the process of mitosis. Mitosis is division of the nucleus, and that has all those phases: prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. Okay. We have cytokinesis, which is going to be division of the cytoplasm to create two new daughter cells. And then we have cancer. Cancer is uncontrolled cell growth or uncontrolled cell division, and that's where there's an issue with this process. Okay, so you can see in those pictures, normal cells are going to show some contact inhibition, so they're not going to grow too close. In cancer cells, they may lack that inhibition and they might grow in clumps, which might create tumors. Okay, so they might grow too quickly, they might grow abnormally, so not having those same growth constraints as normal cells. So hormones are released from cells during which process? Exocytosis. And to prevent cells from changing size, the fluid in an IV should be what? What kind of solution should we put in an IV? It should be isotonic. And beginning at the molecular level, list in correct sequence the levels of organization from the simplest to the most complex. So do you remember there was like tissue, cell, organ, all those things? Do you remember? Should be molecule, that chemical level, right? Cell, tissue, organ, organ system, organism. All right, so we're in class. We're going to play a Blue Kit. Awesome, Blue Kit, super fun. Remember, in later units, we're going to cover tissues and organs in greater detail. We'll study each body system and its component parts. This is just the beginning. And there you have it. It's an overview of the levels of organization, and I hope you learned something new.